Chapter 1844, Perspective. Zhang Yi's approach was exactly the same as that of Deng Shintong. But this was actually the choice that the vast majority of people would make. The young girl in red said, "When it doesn't concern you, you can make decisions from God's perspective. But when it comes to killing life with your own hands, you may make the exact opposite choice." Is this the complexity of your human nature? Zhang Yi listened as the girl in red slowly raised the corners of her mouth after hearing this, her expression full of mockery. "Huh? Did you misunderstand something?" Facing the girl in red's unruffled gaze, Zhang Yi said indifferently, "I don't care whether they live or die. If it doesn't conflict with my interests, I don't mind doing what I can to save their lives. But in this kind of dilemma, no matter what you do, someone will die. It may seem like there are choices, but in reality there aren't. But for me, that's actually the best choice." He held up one finger and narrowed his eyes as he said, "Because in this kind of situation, I don't need to consider the lives of the people on the two tracks. I only need to consider my own interests." This was the first time the red-clad girl had heard such an answer, and it caused an unusual fluctuation in her eyes. "What does this have to do with your interests? These 5 people are complete strangers to you. Are you trying to say that saving 5 people will give you more reward than saving 1 person?" Zhang Yi waved his hand. "Those are all uncertain factors, not the key to the problem at this moment." He continued, "No matter what they say, it will not affect my judgment at that time. The reason I chose to let the train swerve to the track with only 1 person is simply for my own safety. Because if the train really has to run over the bodies of 5 people, the risk it has to bear is far greater than the risk of running over 1 person. So since someone who is not related to me has to die, I can only choose what is in my best interest at this time. It's that simple." Zhang Yi spread his hands, and his expression did not change when he said this. "As for what happened next, you told me to push that person off myself to stop the train. I think I understand. You think I want to sacrifice the interests of a few people to protect the interests of the majority. You're completely wrong. Because what I care about most is my own interests. As for other people, whether it's 1 person, 5 people, or 1,000 people, or 10,000 people, I don't care that much. So why should I need to bear the psychological guilt of killing someone for the sake of 5 people who are unrelated to me?" Zhang Yi's words surprised the young girl in red for a long time. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes, which were flickering like a lake into which a stone had been thrown, were difficult to calm for a long time. There were so many people participating in this trial, but most of them had similar arguments. The standard by which they judged actions was nothing more than the conflict between personal and collective interests. Only Zhang Yi, he didn't care about any of that nonsense. From beginning to end, he had been determined to live only for his own interests. As long as it was to his advantage, he could switch between the principles of maximizing utility and prioritizing freedom at any time. Put simply, his world, and he was the center of it all. This powerful self-belief deeply shocked the young girl in red. The existence of intelligent species like Yang Xinxin was only a bit of a surprise when she discovered it. But for a super-intelligent life form of a high level of civilization like her, Yang Xinxin was only somewhat outstanding. But this guy Zhang Yi was the first she had ever seen. Oh, perhaps in the early days of her civilization's long history there were also similar existences. But as their civilization evolved rapidly, the existence of such individualistic thinking, even somewhat extreme individuals, gradually disappeared. She looked at the male human in front of her. From the other person's eyes, she could feel that the other person was truly convinced that they were the center of the world. "I think, therefore I am," Zhang Yi muttered to himself. He had read the Heart Sutra by the sage Wang countless times. Whenever he was confused, he would read it, and it would then make his next steps clear to him, so that his heart would become clear. The world exists because I am observing it. So I can pretend that the world revolves around me. Once I disappear, the world that I am not observing will also disappear from me. Therefore, no matter what I do, I can just do it from the bottom of my heart." The red-clad girl's eyes sparkled with light. This was an answer she had not received from any of the other trial participants. She was very pleased, so she said to Zhang Yi, "This is a very interesting answer, so I have decided to give you a reward." Zhang Yi's eyes immediately lit up. In fact, when he first made his choice, he had no idea what the correct answer was. But he was smart, and he understood that it was pointless to try to deceive intelligent beings from a higher civilization, so he simply chose to be his true self. Instead, it was this honesty that won the admiration of the girl in red. The girl in red raised her hand, and a ray of light appeared in the palm of her hand. The next moment, it shot directly into Zhang Yi's body. Zhang Yi felt an extremely special sensation, as if his soul had been extracted from his body, and he was now overlooking himself from the perspective of God. The feeling of the separation of the soul and the body was so real, and at this moment, the entire world seemed to have come to a standstill, with the movement of things extremely slow. In the entire world, only his almost spiritual self and the girl in red were able to move freely. An indescribable feeling emerged within his spiritual body. It was as if he had experienced a kind of transcendence. The next moment, a white radiance burst from his left eye, like a white light falling from the sky and entering his pupil. He felt as if he had experienced a century, and when he came to his senses, huge changes had taken place within his body. He didn't sense that his supernatural powers had become stronger, but that something essential had changed. Zhang Yi's left eye felt a little swollen, not painful, but as if there was a warm trickle wrapping around his eyeball. He covered his left eye, and the special power rippled and then settled. The girl in red said, "Next, please proceed to the next level." Zhang Yi looked up and said sincerely, "Thank you." He was incredibly excited at the moment, and what had happened to him at this time was no different from a miracle to him. The red-clad girl simply smiled and said, "This is your well-deserved reward. In the long years of my existence, it has been a long time since I met such an interesting spirit as you." Zhang Yi's body slowly dissolved into particles in the same place where he had been standing. The red-clad girl stood still, quietly pondering the answers he had just given. Soon afterwards, an identical red-clad girl appeared next to her. "The answers you got seemed very interesting." A third red-clad girl also appeared in this space. The meaning of life is shaped by the belief that one's very existence is the only meaning in the universe. This is a very powerful understanding. A fourth girl in red appeared. Perhaps he could be the one. A fifth, a sixth, a seventh. Many girls in red appeared in the space. It doesn't matter, nothing matters anymore. We never had any hope for anything. When you understand everything, you will fall into a deeper despair. But his thinking has given me a new understanding. It's useless. It's just because his eyes can see so little that he simply doesn't understand what true despair is. Let's wait and see. He's interesting. Okay. Zhang Yi saw a blinding flash of light before his eyes, and the next moment, the world in front of him changed again. This ability to manipulate space was something that even Zhang Yi, a bishop-level time and space mutant, was envious of. The power of this mighty god-level civilization had reached an unbelievable level. The scene in front of him was still white space, but soon, as his feet touched down on a solid white ground, black lines rapidly and evenly spread out in all directions from his feet. Soon, a whole white hexahedral room appeared. The white space, divided into a grid of squares by black lines, created a huge room. This feeling was somewhat familiar to Zhang Yi, as it resembled the simplest three-dimensional drawings he had learned in school. Even as a junior high school student, he had definitely drawn a three-dimensional diagram of a hexahedron with a pencil on a piece of white paper. This world gave off a very surreal feeling. Until the next moment, when this world appeared to be filled with numerous human figures. Many of the people who had entered this world with them before were standing on the floor of the white room. Emperor Indra, King Arthur, Zeus of Asgard. Among these figures, Zhang Yi also saw some very strange and unfamiliar people. Some were completely covered in huge white battle suits, with not a single inch of skin exposed, and inside the translucent visor of the huge helmet, one could see the ripples of water. There was a humanoid creature wrapped in a black cloak, with a white rope knot wrapped around its waist, and a thick tail exposed beneath the cloak. There was also a lizard race, wrapped in pitch-black armor, arms folded as it looked around menacingly. There was a young man with long black hair that reached his heels, with bangs in front that covered half his face, but you could see that his skin was as white as snow. Zhang Yi frowned. He thought back carefully. When he had arrived, he had not seen these characters among the human coalition. Basically, everyone present was a well-known figure. Those below the existence of Epsilon were not qualified to enter the front line of battle. Could it be that these guys had shown a special form? That shouldn't be the case either. The previous 2 trials were both written tests, and there was no martial arts component. Or did they go through different trials? Zhang Yi had his doubts. However, he felt a sense of familiarity with some of the people. But since most people were wearing combat uniforms, and not many of them revealed their true faces, there was no way to be sure. Just then, Yang Xinxin's voice came from behind Zhang Yi. "Brother, you're out." Zhang Yi turned his head, and Yang Xinxin appeared to have come out of thin air, running up to Zhang Yi and wrapping her arms around his shoulders, beaming with a gentle smile. Zhang Yi was not at all surprised, and nodded with a smile, yes. It was inevitable that Yang Xinxin would pass the trial. With her intelligence, the trial could not have been simpler. And one after the other, more and more figures appeared in this white space. Many people had been eliminated in the previous 2 trials. Ling and the Knight of Cross had opened the doors of light, so many people took the opportunity to run in at that time. They didn't care about the number of people participating, because after their severe trials, those who failed would be eliminated. In fact, it was not impossible for everyone to be eliminated. The strong people like Emperor Indra and King Arthur had not been eliminated. As being standing at the top of the planet's mutant world, no matter what flaws they had in their personalities, their character, beliefs, and strength were unquestionable. Given the difficulty of the previous 2 challenges, they will definitely be able to pass. Feeling Zhang Yi's gaze, Emperor Indra even threw him a proud smile. He always had that expression, his chin slightly raised, a carefree smile on his face, as if he didn't care about anything, because he was the only one in a high and mighty position. But when facing Zhang Yi, his self-cultivation was lacking, and he was unable to let go of the battle he lost to Zhang Yi for a long time. Zhang Yi just smiled, and at the moment, he didn't bother to argue with the other person. Slowly, the people on Zhang Yi's team also appeared one after the other. However, some people were eliminated. Zhang Yi didn't see the figures of Uncle Yu, Zhou Haimei, Yang Xia, and the others. The members of the Heavenly God Squad and the Volt Shadow Troop were also eliminated, with nearly half of them gone. But even so, the number of people around him was also increasing, and in the end, more than 20 people even remained. This scene made Emperor Indra feel a little resentful. Not just him, but all the other human mutant teams looked at Zhang Yi and the others with strange eyes. In order to encircle and annihilate Loridek, none of their team members below Epsilon had gone to the battlefield to avoid casualties. But this was not a problem at all for Zhang Yi. But now, Zhang Yi had a huge advantage. In this place, combat power is balanced. Everyone's supernatural abilities are on the same level. In other words, even if a bishop-level mutant were to face a delta-level mutant, the former would stand a good chance of being turned over. And the people around Zhang Yi are almost as strong as the rest of the human mutant team combined. If a battle were to break out, it would be bad. King Arthur stood next to Merlin and Lancelot. Lancelot, holding his large sword, frowned. "That guy, isn't that cheating?" Hearing Lancelot's grumble, King Arthur just gave a faint smile. He crossed his arms. "Don't be nervous, they won't be a threat to us. At least, not yet." Lancelot frowned upon hearing this and said, "King, what makes you so sure that he won't turn on us?" King Arthur didn't say a word, and Merlin, with long silver-gray hair, next to him, said with a smile, "Lancelot, your little head must be confused. If killing was allowed here, then from the very beginning, the rulers of this world would not have deliberately controlled our supernatural powers. Even outside the doors of light, we were about to be killed by the 6 wings of mechanical civilization. Therefore, this place is restricted by rules. Chaos is an incredibly cautious person, and he would not act before figuring out the rules. King Arthur smiled and tacitly agreed with Merlin's words. After Merlin finished speaking, he looked in all directions of this huge white room. Moreover, there are quite a few powerful people among these people. Haven't you noticed that there are many new faces? Lancelot's attention had been focused on Zhang Yi the entire time, and he hadn't paid much attention to the others, since most of them were old acquaintances. After hearing Merlin's words, he also scanned the surroundings and indeed discovered that something was not right. How did this happen? Where did all these extra people come from? Zhang Yi was surrounded by Yang Xinxin, Lu Karen, Fatty Su, and the others. There were still people who had not finished their trials, so they were waiting for the young woman in red to give the next set of instructions. So, taking advantage of this short break, they began discussing the current situation. Everyone knew that they had all been through the same trials, but when the answers they gave were different, or even completely opposite, they were a little confused. I thought mine was the standard answer. Genius Fatty Su, with his chin in his hand, analyzed the situation with a serious look on his face. It seems that there must be something I haven't accounted for. Zhang Yi didn't even look at him, but directly asked Yang Xinxin. Xinxin, what do you think about this? Yang Xinxin gave her opinion without hesitation, with a slight smile. The trolley problem itself has no standardized answer. Fatty Su froze for a moment. The trolley problem? But that's obviously a high-speed train. Yang Xinxin frowned slightly and had to explain simply, the trolley problem is a philosophical question that has existed in the human world for a long time. The manager is using this question to raise a doubt in us, and no one can give a perfect answer. Simply put, it's the same as if your mother and your wife fell into the water at the same time. Who would you save? Fatty Su looked up proudly, chest puffed out, and said, that's not a hard question. Of course I'd save my mom. Zhang Yi couldn't help but applaud Fatty Su. Good, good. I hope that one day when you have a wife, you can tell her the same thing. Fatty Su laughed. What's there to be afraid of? My wife is waterproof, she can fall in the water and be fine. Puff. Although many people were used to Fatty Su's clear-headed stupidity, they still couldn't help spitting out their saliva at this moment. Everyone was at a loss for words. Yang Xinxin took a deep breath, decisively ignored Fatty Su, and turned to Zhang Yi. So when faced with this test, I knew that the management was just trying to see our thinking logic and attitude when facing a situation and solving a problem. Perhaps it also involves some areas of human nature. She held up a finger. From the beginning, the messenger of the mighty god-level civilization said that this was a trial of selection. They are looking for creatures that meet their requirements for a particular purpose. Therefore, most people whose problem-solving methods or logical thinking skills are not up to scratch will be eliminated. For example, people who waver back and forth and hesitate should not be the one they are looking for. Yang Xinxin's explanation made many people in the room nod repeatedly. Xiao Honglian propped her chin in her hand and said in a calm tone, I hardly hesitated when making my choice, so is this the key to my passing? But Yang Xinxin glanced around. There are still a lot of people here. And, her gaze sharpened, there seemed to be even more people than before. You've noticed that too, Zhang Yi said indifferently. More and more people were here, and there were more unfamiliar figures. Those guys, why don't they look like humans? Fatty Su looked off in the distance at a being that was 5 or 6 meters tall, covered in black armor, and had a long, thick tail behind it, and his voice trembled a little. This can't be the result of a mutant transformation, can it? He looks so familiar. No need for him to say it, everyone else could see who he looked like too. The Wulwan Empire's commander-in-chief, the gatekeeper of Hades, who had once dominated Tianhai City and almost destroyed the entire Huashu kingdom. Deng Shintong gazed intently in another direction. If you must put it that way, then the person next to him looks a bit like someone from beneath the Qinling Mountains. The direction he was looking in was the long-haired, slender young man with snow-white skin. Zhang Yi drew in a sharp breath, feeling his body tense up a little. His hands hung down by his sides, palms slightly curled, in an optimal state ready to run or attack at any moment. It seems that this time, we're not the only ones who've been drawn here. In addition to human and mechanical civilization, the existence of other ethnic groups also did not miss this opportunity to come to the world behind the gates of light. And the administrators of the mighty god-level civilization did not reject them and also allowed them to participate in the trials. Brian, Newton, and Magneto appeared here, and they came over to Zhang Yi and the others and greeted Zhang Yi. "Hi, bro. It looks like everything is going well for you." "Phew, but it seems a bit crowded in here." Brian looked around and then tugged at the collar of his shirt. "There's a lot of unpleasant smells in here, it's really annoying." Seeing Brian, Zhang Yi suddenly remembered that he was a dog. So he walked over and whispered to Brian, "What do you smell from those guys over there?" His eyes looked at those new faces. Brian frowned and said to Zhang Yi, "They're from different places. There's a strong smell of dirt on them, and oh, I can smell the lizard people from before. And the smell of seawater." Without making it too obvious, he signaled with his eyes for Zhang Yi to look at the several humanoid creatures wrapped in their special black and green combat suits. Do advanced civilizations also exist in the underwater world? But I should have guessed that a long time ago.